Sonic Mania is the shit I've wanted for almost 2 decades. I love this drop dash, this background is sick, and the music makes me cum. I heard Labyrinth Zone and that shit made me fucking cum. Sega have always been one of my favorite game companies, and this encapsulates almost everything I like about them, which is a little odd considering they have almost nothing to do with it. This game really made me want to talk about the Sonic series and Sega in general, and really delve into why I think the series is so unique. It's 1983, and the American games industry is losing its wife and kids, but Japan is doing great. So the former slot machine manufacturing company Sega releases their first home video game console, the SG-1000, which can play awesome games like Galaga, Hang On 2, and Space Mountain. There's only one problem. The SG-1000 is released on a slightly unfortunate date of the Nintendo Famicom's debut. This heavily damaged the sales of the system, but somehow Sega managed to still make a decent profit from the thing, and even made a revision that doubled as a home computer. Pretty impressive considering the Famicom basically wiped out several console manufacturers in Japan due to its insane dominance of the market at the time. A couple years later, and Sega releases the Master System, or as it was originally called in Japan, the Sega Mark III. Sounds like some sick robot out of Macross, but in reality it just played mediocre versions of Outrun and Space Harrier. The difference with this console was that it was designed from the ground up to compete with Nintendo's Famicom. Aside from lacking the extra audio channel the NES had, it was a more powerful console in every aspect. It had a better processor, 4 times the amount of RAM and 8 times the amount of video RAM, along with 64 colors in its palette compared to the NES's 52. But even with these improvements, the console still didn't get much attention. The biggest reason I can think of is that it just didn't have a killer app. When you bought a Nintendo, right out of the box you got a great game with Super Mario Bros. And had several amazing first-party titles in Metroid, Legend of Zelda, and Excitebike. The Master System, on the other hand, came with Hang On, a Yu Suzuki classic. However, this is the problem. Sega should have used some resources into making an original game designed specifically to take advantage of what the Master System could do, instead of just porting an arcade title. If anything, it makes the Master System look weak as you have a more colorful and faster arcade version to compare it to. Sega tried to introduce a mascot in Alex Kidd for the console after the success of Super Mario, which gave the Master System a bit of a boost but still wasn't much of a system seller. While the console didn't do as well as the NES financially, the results were still respectable, allowing them to make another attempt. And this time they were going to go all out with their next console, the Mega Drive.
A machine that will give him the power to journey into the Mega World.
Yes!
Mega Drive from Sega.
Now, I don't want to be like one of those, those people who are like, Nintendo was like, and Sega was like, It's hard to talk about Sega and their history without bringing up Nintendo due to them being each other's biggest competitors. I'm only talking about Nintendo because I have to explain some of the decisions Sega made. I don't want to act like I'm saying much that's original here, like I found some fossils or something. Blowing out anything that could have been done on the NES or Master System, the Genesis was an absolute powerhouse of a console, but Sega made the same mistake as last time by packaging the system with an arcade port of some dumb Animorphs game, although this one did look a lot more like the arcade counterpart. Even without any real killer apps on the system, it still managed to sell very well, blowing the Master System's profits out of the water. One thing that helped was that Sega initially tried to go after a more teenage demographic with the Genesis, lots of sports games and arcade ports. Altered Beast, the bundled title, even had a decent amount of gore, which is very surprising compared to the squeaky clean Mario Bros. That the NES came with. It also seems that with the giant step up in graphical power, people were just more drawn to it. Sega even went out of their way to attack Nintendo and their ads, telling customers, hey, the NES is old, and our console is the new generation. Nintendo's response to the success of the Genesis was basically just to do what they always did, except better. They released the Super Famicom and packaged it with a better and more colorful Mario Bros. Game. It seems as if they took a look at the Genesis and said, alright, let's just make a console that's more powerful in every way to theirs. except for processing speed, which we'll get back to later. Sega is kind of in a bad situation. The Genesis power was really carrying the thing for the first 2 years, and now their main competitor had released a console more powerful and with more incredibly polished and beautiful looking games. If they wanted to stay relevant, they needed to make something to help the Genesis' brand, and basically just make their own version of fucking Mario Bros since that shit was selling so well. They decided to go with the mascot route again, and commissioned this guy named Naoto Oshima to draw some cartoons. He eventually ended up drawing this little guy who was missing an arm, which ended up being changed later. I guess Sega thought the idea of an amputated mascot would be a bit too progressive. After a couple small adjustments and a name change, Sonic was established as the main character for their new game. Hey, what's your favorite shape? It's a circle, stupid. Sonic's design is genius because his whole body is almost entirely circles. I'm not sure why, but circles are just really appealing to us, and using them in a character design basically ensures that it'll be recognizable. Mickey Mouse is a bunch of circles. Mario is a bunch of fucking Pac-Man! Yuji Naka, who previously developed the hit game Girl's Garden, ended up directing Sonic. He liked speedrunning Super Mario Bros. And really took advantage of the idea of Sonic being fast. Sega already had the teenage demographic locked down. With Sonic, they basically tried to go after the kids that would normally buy an SNES with a very colorful and fast-paced game, along with some great marketing, even replacing the mature and gory Altered Beast so parents wouldn't be scared of buying it for their kids. They also tried going after the black demographic by making the console cheaper. Hey, wanna know what blast processing is?
Blast processing. Blast processing? So what's blast processing do?
Basically, some of Sega's marketing team, probably near the point of having a stroke, looked at the specs for the SNES, praying for the Genesis to be more powerful in any way and said, our clock speed's better than yours, fuck you! The commercials make it seem like this higher clock speed makes the games incredibly fast-paced and is the secret to Sonic's speed or something, which is kind of true. A higher clock speed helps a bit with frame rates, but many of the SNES's games run at 60 FPS, just like Sonic does. Really, you could probably port Sonic onto the SNES without any real issues. Basically, blast processing is just some stupid marketing shit. They also tried making Sonic a more rebellious character, which especially shines through in the commercials when he fucks with old people and pisses in the street, and even is implemented into the game. When you stand idle for a bit, instead of doing a charming little animation of him swaying or dancing or something like most platforming games, he looks at you really irritated, like he's waiting for you to get your shoes on so you can go get him some Taco Bell. In a way, the game's own mechanics can be seen as only really being there for marketing. The general momentum of these games is that when you do a platforming section or two, and are then rewarded with a speed section where Sonic goes through loop-de-loops and plows through a lot of enemies, they're essentially rewards for skillful play. However, when you start thinking that, a question comes up. What are you being rewarded for with the game's first level, Green Hill Zone? The whole stage is incredibly safe with a lot of non-intrusive enemies, barely any hazards, and lots of downhill slopes where you can build up a lot of speed and not worry about anything. The whole level is a reward, but what are you being rewarded for? Well, it's obvious. You're being rewarded for buying a Sega Genesis. Sega wants to convince you that you made the most fucking awesome decision in your life by getting your dad to buy this console. It's also insane commercial fodder. When you watch a Genesis commercial and Sonic comes up, it's almost nothing but Green Hill Zone and sometimes Starlight Zone, which coincidentally are the only two stages with loop-de-loops. And boy, the Genesis commercials love showing Sonic going through fucking loop-de-loops. It's basically a giant lie, and this becomes very apparent when you're thrusted into Marble Zone. Green Hill Zone took the team over 6 months to make. It had several paths and secrets and is always a blast to play through. Marble Zone is basically the complete opposite. It's completely linear with the exception of the third act, and there's no opportunity to build up any speed. It's all basic puzzle solving and platforming, which doesn't at all fit with the mechanics of Sonic's movement. I understand the decision of having this be the second level though. Originally the game's water level, Labyrinth Zone, was going to follow up Green Hill, but they had to be moved around due to the level's difficulty. I can understand Marble Zone being their pick. While there are many obstacles that can crush Sonic in the stage, your speed is generally cut short in areas where these hazards are telegraphed on screen. Along with that, you also have the lava, which if this was designed to be a later level in the game might have been replaced with bottomless pits. Falling in the lava punishes the player, but still gives them multiple opportunities to save themselves depending on how well they can recollect their rings. The enemies as well aren't very difficult or frustrating. A lot of people seem to have trouble with this caterpillar though, and I don't know why. All you have to do is press down. And to beat these wolves, just fucking wait for them to turn around and fucking hit their tails! I don't mean to be so negative right off the bat though. I really do like the first Sonic a lot. The enemies are done especially well. Almost all the enemies in the game can be defeated by simply having Sonic turn into a ball. When he's in this state, he essentially becomes a big hitbox that can plow through many of the game's obstacles. To counterbalance this though, the game has many other hazards in the forms of spikes, bottomless pits, and platforms that can crush Sonic, leading to an instant death. The game also tries to discourage hesitation by making the price of getting hit very manageable. It's very unique also. During the level, Sonic can collect rings. Most platformers at the time would simply use these for something meaningless like points, but in Sonic they essentially give you health insurance. As long as Sonic has one ring, he won't die if he gets hit by an enemy. Now I hear a lot of chuckle fucks say, what's the point of having more than one ring if you live? Because fuckface. The more rings you have, the more will come out when you get hit. With your invincibility, this allows you to collect a good amount of them back before they disappear, allowing you to have more security. The most amount of rings that'll fall out of Sonic is 20, but there's still a good reason to collect a lot of rings past that. You get an extra life if you manage to collect 100, which is actually pretty useful in this game, as getting a game over will send you to the beginning unless you have a continue. And if you can hold 50 when you finish the act, you'll be allowed into the special zone where you can get an item called the Chaos Emeralds. And even in these special zones, rings are still important, as getting 50 of them will grant Sonic a continue. A lot of the zones are really solid also. Spring Yard Zone is great aside from these dumb blocks. Playing these just reinforces that Sonic isn't very fun when he has to do vertical movement, and it's something that would be toned down a lot in the sequel games. Starlight Zone has to be the most relaxing and fun level in the game, with many speed sections like Green Hill, and enemies here that aren't very annoying aside from these bombs. Considering this is near the end of the game, it's surprising to me that they would opt for such a relaxing, short, and easy level. Maybe they want to congratulate you for getting through Labyrinth Zone. Gotta talk about the music also. The music was composed by this really funny Japanese guy who plays bass, Masato Nakamura. The soundtrack, while having some really good melody, surprisingly has a big focus on bass. And if you listen closely to it, you'll hear it hitting a lot more than just the root notes, which you don't really see a lot in most game soundtracks. Usually game composers at this time would just use the bass in its most basic function of hitting root notes. I think Nakamura, being predominantly a bass player, explains a lot. The songs have a big funk pop feel from these bass movements and a bit from the very snappy drums the Genesis could make. The Genesis's extra sound channel also added a lot of depth to the music. Listen to that beautiful polyphony. One interesting thing is that Nakamura actually thought the music he made for the game was good enough to remake for his duo group, Dreams Come True. One of their songs especially takes massive influence and liberties from Green Hill's theme. I actually think it sounds awesome, and that brass makes me want to drink Diet Coke in the shower and not masturbate. And this good-ass music is the only thing that gets me through Labyrinth Zone, which might be the most anxiety-induced level in any platforming game. And that's because of one reason: drowning. I have to wonder why they thought making Sonic drown would be a good idea in the first place. It'd be one thing if these underwater sections were short enough that you could enter and leave the water in time. This would encourage the player to speed through them as fast as they could to survive. But that just isn't the case, as they're not only too long to just speed through, they're most of the level, which forces the player to huddle around areas that spawn bubbles to survive. Meaning the level has a lot of waiting around instead of forward movement, literally the opposite of what Sonic was designed to be. They might have wanted to add the drowning in for challenge, but really it doesn't add much to it at all besides monotony. Originally, Sonic was supposed to get a snorkel power-up, which I imagine would have prevented drowning and maybe acted as a shield. You can still find the sprites for it in the code, and they even fit Sonic's model. This would have made the level a lot less painful and even rewarded good play, by letting the player have the snorkel the whole level if they could avoid getting hit. The worst part is it can't even be finished after the third act. In the very last level, Scrap Brain Act 3, it's just Labyrinth Zone again. What the fuck? Did they know everyone would hate it? It's like Sega is going, hey, gotta make sure you're not having too much fun. Gotta make sure you're not too into it. Need to make sure Sonic isn't that enjoyable. I know I'm not the first person to complain about drowning, but Labyrinth Zone isn't just bad because of that one aspect, or even the horrendously slow movement of Sonic in the water. Forget about the water for a second. Fuck the water. The enemies in this stage are horrible, like these statues that shoot fire just a couple frames after they come on screen. And especially the Orbinauts, which I can't for the life of me figure out how to maneuver around their attacks without exploiting the game. And putting them in these tight corridors blocking you from air bubbles is especially malicious. This is also the point in the game where it goes, hey, you wanted to go fast with Sonic, right? Well, sorry. There is no area in the whole of Labyrinth Zone where Sonic ever builds up any speed, aside from maybe these slides. The level is all puzzles all the time. Most of them just equate to finding a switch, but one of them actually tripped me up a bit. Oh no, I can't open this? Oh, it doesn't even have a collision box on him. Anything back here? No, just rings. Fuck this, I'm going to YouTube. Okay. This seems good.
So here we go with Labyrinth Zone Act 2.
Shut the fuck up, you British asshole! Fuck your video. Fuck Labyrinth Zone. Fuck Sonic. I'm tired of pretending to like this shit. It's like Joy Division. Sonic 1 introduces a lot of great concepts, but it's just so unpolished that the many imperfections become frustrating. Sonic can move very fast, but the level design never complements it. Collecting the Chaos Emerald should be a great way to reward replays, but nothing happens if you collect them. Having multiple branching paths is such a great idea, but the game never sticks with using them. Even though Sonic was supposed to be the flagship title for the Genesis, I think it might have been under budget, and slightly rushed out to the shelves so Sega could start seriously competing with the SNES. I couldn't find any real figures to show how much money was put into the game, but I just get a feeling that a couple corners were cut, especially with the bosses. They're fun enough to play, but the boss will always be Dr. Robotnik and his little rascal scooter thing aside from the end, with different objects protruding from the bottom like fire and spikes. And in Labyrinth Zone, they didn't even make a boss, it's more like a timed platforming section. I will say I'm a big fan of Starlight Zone's boss though. I like that it implements something you learn to use in the level with these seesaws, and there's multiple ways you can inflict damage. Another thing that just makes it seem sort of rushed is that sometimes Sonic will just get crushed in areas that should be safe, like this area in Starlight Zone, which probably would have been fine if these platforms would just slightly move down, or this area in Labyrinth Zone that has the same issue. Spikes also don't respect your invincibility frames for whatever reason. The game already has a lot of core problems, and these small overlooks don't help at all. But I honestly can't fault Sega much. It's very popular on the internet to say Sonic has always been bad, or that after the first game he went downhill, but they were doing something very ambitious with this game, and they just didn't quite know how to design levels to accommodate and encourage Sonic's speed yet. But even with all that in mind, I just can't recommend playing this one. It's so frustrating. I had to take Valium while playing it. I had to shove opiates up my ass to enjoy this shit, and they didn't go well together. After playing it like 4 times, I honestly hate this game. Even Harry Potter hates this game.
I hate this level. I just hate this game. Why have I done it?
If I played it before my dad drank all my cough syrup and dipped, it would have been awesome. But unfortunately, my first playthrough came after getting in and out for the first time, and going in and out of a vagina. But you know what? None of this matters, because the sequel fixed everything.